Many of you probably saw the title of this episode and were like, I need this. Like, I'm killing myself to keep my students engaged and I'm exhausted and they are not any more engaged. And we wonder why. Like, where have I gone wrong? What do I need to do better? And so we are going to address all of these beliefs and have some mindset shifts in this podcast today. But we're also going to have some practical tips too, because I'll never leave you hanging there without something practical. But here's where I just feel like we need to start this conversation around student attention, student engagement, and your own personal energy levels. I think somewhere along the way, and I can't exactly pinpoint when this happened, but teaching science stopped being about curiosity and discovery. And it just started being so much about getting through all the standards and having good test scores. And so, of course, this naturally resulted in our students not caring because they don't care about covering standards. They don't care about passing standardized tests like we care because of our job security. I think back to the days of being required to write my SWABAT on the board. My students will be able to statements. Like, that was to check a box for my admin. It meant nothing to my students. They didn't care what that was on the board, what that objective was. I even had a score. We were required to post the standard we were covering that day. Like, the students didn't care. Of course they didn't. And so, of course, this leaves us tired. We've got time limits. You've got pressure. It leaves you running like a hamster on a wheel. You're trying to get through it all. And you're fighting a losing battle, trying to use these different metrics that are being required of you to chase and hold all of that while also holding the attention and the engagement of your students. Like, you're doing all of this work and it doesn't feel like you're getting a lot from them in return. And so today we're going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about how to be more entertaining or more exciting. We're not going to talk about how you need to work harder or stay later or try to become a TikTok science teacher influencer so that your students think you're relevant, okay? We're not going to talk about any of that. Instead, we are going to talk about how to keep your students' attention without having to sacrifice yourself and use up all of your energy reserves in the process. Because here is something that I believe to be true, and I really want you to hear from me. Your students' disengagement is not a personal failure. It is a predictable, expected response that they are having to a system that has trained them to value answers over thinking and speed over depth and compliance over curiosity and efficiency and productivity over exploration. And that is the system in which you are teaching every single day. So, all of that to say, we're going to start with 3 mindset shifts that I think are important because it makes sense that our brains start thinking some type of way when we too have been forced to comply with this system over the last few decades. And then we're going to talk about 6 practical tips. Like, again, I'm not going to leave you with just like, change your mindset and be more positive, guys. Like, we're going to get practical too, I promise. But there truly are some mindset shifts that I think we need to have because of how we've naturally been conditioned ourselves to perform in this kind of environment. So that is what we are going to cover today. And hopefully these tips are going to require low energy input from you. I literally made this list and then I went back and thought, okay, how much energy will this require of a teacher listener to execute this? And then I made some modifications to my list. Okay, because I don't want you leaving this episode thinking that you need to be more fun and you need to be more exciting and that you need to give more so that your students can be more engaged. That is not what we want here. Okay, so we will talk about how are we going to keep their attention? How are we going to engage them without exhausting ourselves? Let's get into it.
This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode.
So I'm really excited about this episode actually because so many of you, the vast majority of the hundreds of responses I got to my survey that I sent out to podcast listeners at the beginning of this year, the vast majority were issues with student engagement, their attention, them not caring, and just general apathy. And I have a spreadsheet where I have organized every podcast episode I've ever done into categories. And I need to make them into Spotify playlists. I haven't quite done that yet. It just takes a little bit of time. But I'm going to link in the show notes this spreadsheet. And I'm going to link it in a way that it'll open it on the tab about student apathy. And this is like a live document. Every time I record podcasts, I update the document with the newest episodes that like fall in that category. So like if you just want general support with student apathy, go check out that link in the show notes. I think it's going to really help you. There's also a specific episode 123, that's all about what to do when we care more than our students. I think that would really help you too. So I want to start off by saying that. The second thing I want to start off by saying is, y'all, I cannot tell you how much I value hearing from you. I have honestly dealt with a little bit of imposter syndrome, like speaking to you guys on some of these topics when I do feel like I've been honest that I have not been in the classroom in years since we adopted our oldest. Like I have stayed home since then. It started because of financial reasons and the cost of daycare versus how much I was making and having some children back to back quicker than we ever anticipated, especially on our infertility journey. And then it got to the point where like, I just never expected It's Not Rocket Science and the Secondary Science Simplified podcast to be what it's become. And it's bigger than my britches, y'all. And I'm just one human being. And so continuing this while being in the classroom full time, like would truly be impossible. Like something would have to give. And so one of the ways that I've tried to combat that is one, I'm so grateful that I'm just one voice that can hopefully offer encouragement to you. And hopefully you hear that and it's not entirely prescriptive. Two, I'm so grateful that because of this role, I'm able to be like a connector and a curator of all these different high school science teachers all over the world. I'm able to like have these conversations with hundreds of you a week and hear things that's going on in your classroom in this part of the country and your classroom over here. And you have this size class and you have that. And one, I have a larger sample size to test out the theories that worked in my own classroom and hear how they're working in yours. And two, just hear how no matter where you are in all these variety of classrooms, everyone tends to struggle with the same things. And I'm just grateful to be a part of it and to hopefully be one voice of encouragement. But I am by no means an expert. And all of that to say, you're like, stop downloading your personal problems on us. I say all that because I want you to know, like, it is so important to me to have full-time high school science teachers in the classroom right now on this podcast, sharing your experiences, sharing your tips, what's working for you right now, sharing things you've tested out that I've said and how they've worked or whatever. And that's why I want you to come be a guest on this podcast. Like, it matters so much to me. I have an application I will link in the show notes, but you can also just find it at bit.ly/SSSguest, SSS guest, okay, for the podcast. But I've been collecting applications like the last few months, and I say on the application, like, I'm going to review all of them in May. And then I'm going to schedule interviews for the whole summer because I've learned that is the best time to talk to you guys when you are not in the classroom full time and kind of have those conversations. And then I'm going to share those conversations throughout the rest of the year and into next year and all of that. So I want to hear from you. So please apply. It's so important for me to elevate other people's voices that are not just my own. All of that to say though, from this survey, again, where I got to connect with so many of you and hear your experiences, the huge resonating issues are with apathy and engagement and keeping their attention. A lot of you who teach in block class periods, you're having your students for 80, 90 minutes at a time. You're having a hard time with this. A lot of you mentioned getting them to stop just Googling every answer and actually engage and use their brains and think. So many people talking about how do I make the content more relatable and relevant when everything is irrelevant to them. I've tried everything, literally everything. What else am I supposed to do? Not caring is the norm. Or some of you even said like, you feel like you're teaching to a brick wall. One of you said that you feel like your honor students, everything you try feels like gimmicky and babyish and not actual true engagement. So we've tried all the things. What do we do now? Okay. Like I said, first 3 mindset shifts I want you to have. 1, we need to put this in its proper place. That's something we talk about this podcast a lot. Engaging students matters for sure. It definitely matters. But we are not going to sacrifice your energy on the altar of engagement, okay? We're not going to sacrifice your mental health and turn you into a circus performer just to attempt to engage your students. Students are less engaged than ever because they have zero resilience in their muscles, okay? They have been trained to do everything quickly. They want quick answers. They want to get through your class quickly so they can get on the next thing. Like I said at the top of this episode, this is not a personal, you've done this to them problem. This is a societal, systemic problem. And therefore, we need to put this in its proper place. You cannot possibly fix this entire issue, okay? So please do not kill yourselves trying to do that. All you can do, again, another refrain I have on this podcast, is give it your best effort within your current capacity in the current season of life that you are in. And that effort is going to change. You may be able to put in more effort to this now than you can 6 months from now. You may have more effort in 9 months than you do today, because it's all about your capacity in your season, okay? But I want you to take a deep breath and let go of some of this responsibility because they had just have the most atrophied engagement muscles. Again, their brains are not used to having to engage in something and work hard. Their brains are not used to having to be impatient when they've always had the opportunity to click watch next episode now. Like I'm still watching. They're used to downloading entire series of television shows where a lot of us were raised, if you're my age, where you would ride your bicycle to Blockbuster and get a CD of One Tree Hill episodes. It had 4 episodes on it. Ride your bike home, watch it, then go back and return and have to wait till the next CD of the released season from last year it comes available to you because it's people have a waiting list for it. And you couldn't watch it live because you had dance rehearsals or basketball practice during the live episode and your parents didn't have a DVR to record it. Okay. We are just in such different upbringings. And I think that's one reason too, why we feel so discouraged that we can't engage them because we don't get it because it seems like it should be easy, but we just we're on different planets in terms of how we were raised, how our brains were used, and how their brains have just had this everything instantaneous their whole entire lives. So of course they haven't used and stretched those muscles. And so let's give a lot of grace here for them, honestly, and for ourselves. The second mindset shift I want you to have is you have got to be true to who you are. One of the biggest energy sucks out there is trying to be someone you are not. And that's one of the things that I think the beautiful thing about social media and the hardest thing about it. The beautiful is all of the inspiration that can come, all of the ideas, all the things you can see other people doing, and you can get these ideas and try to apply them yourselves. But the hard thing about that is you're looking at people with such different natural personalities, different natural capacities and energy levels, and then can be in completely different seasons of life from you. And we're trying to use a transitive property and apply what they're doing and say, oh, well, this must work in mine. And that's why I said at the top of this, even some of the things I say may not work for you and your personality, and that is okay. And that's why we're starting with this mindset shift of take what works for you and what fits naturally into your personality. If you try to be someone you are not, you're going to drain twice as much energy. So for example, I've shared before, I do have more of an entertainment personality. I've shared that I went to art school. I did theater. I was a dancer. I taught dance all through college to pay for things and after college for a few years. I coached dance team. Again, I like to be on stage. I think of that Kristen Wiig, SNL skit, don't make me sing, don't make me dance. I kind of have an outrageous personality and I like to do outrageous things to get my students' attention. That does not work for a lot of people. And so you should not do those things if that does not fit your personality. And that, again, this isn't about entertaining. That is definitely a default for me and something that I naturally go to though, because it fits my personality. And that's okay because it doesn't suck the energy out of me, but it might suck the energy out of you. And so I really want you to get really clear about your strengths and your weaknesses, and let's live within those strengths. If you need help with that, I have a mini course, a virtual professional development mini course called Core Values. It's like the very first unit, if you will, in my full comprehensive virtual professional development course. And I'll link it in the show notes, but get really clear on your strengths and your weaknesses. And let's lean into your strengths. Let's not try to adopt things that are very much like a weakness for you. And then the third mindset shift I want you to have before we get into the practical is to remember relationships at the end of the day have to matter most. I don't care if you're the most extroverted or the most introverted teacher, the most entertaining or the most low energy or least outrageous person ever. I don't care if you wear, a Miss Frizzle outfit to school every day or if you wear like a gray on gray outfit. All right. At the end of the day, we have to care about the students. It starts with caring about them. Every single classroom management issue, every single tip I share, all of it doesn't matter if you do not have personal relationships with your students and care more about them as humans than you care about them as your students. If you care about them and you care about them authentically, they will see that. And that builds a level of respect and care for you and what you're trying to teach them that can't be created outside of that environment of having a relationship with them. So we need to lean into caring about them. And part of that is trying to care about what they care about. And I have a teacher who I've had on this podcast like 5 times, Zach Matson. You can search my website for his name, Matson, and see every episode I've had him on where he talks about this. But he is someone who modeled this so incredibly well. He has an entirely different personality from me. Definitely a much more like even personality. You could even go and say monotone. He has like a dry sense of humor. He can be very sarcastic. But let me tell you something. I never doubted that he cared for me. I knew that he cared for me as a human. I knew that he cared for my friends and the way that he engages in a relationship. And that made all of the difference. Like I took his class several times because I had him for a few different science courses. And I cried in his class because it's one of his classes. AP Chem was one of the hardest classes I ever took. But at the end of the day, I walked in and I engaged with what he was doing because I knew that he cared about me. And thus in turn, it reciprocated and I respected him and respected what he was doing in the classroom. So relationships have to matter most. All right, those are some mindset things I wanted to start off with. Now let's get into the nitty gritty with the 6 practical tips I want to share with you today about keeping your students' attention while also not exhausting yourself. So practical tip number 1, low lift relationship builders and ways to get students engaged with little wins. Like I said, they don't have the muscles of like engagement and resilience, which we've talked about in this podcast before, because they are conditioned to have all these quick wins and quick answers. And so I think making sure we are giving them little wins that kind of stretch their muscles a little bit will help to build confidence. I can't venture to guess the motives of why every student disengages, but I would guess or hypothesize that some students are disengaging from you because they have tried caring before and it has failed them. So I really feel like engagement starts with safety and not necessarily excitement or entertainment. So I want to ask you to consider, like, do students feel safe in your classroom? Do they feel like you will not make them feel dumb or let their classmates make them feel dumb? Like if they ask a question and you answer it, but their classmates are allowed to kind of mock them and ride on them, that is going to make them feel unsafe and then want to disengage further. Do they feel safe messing up in your class or failing? Like, are there opportunities to stretch and grow that aren't going to be detrimental to them in their grades? And so thus they're not afraid of that. And ultimately, do your students believe that you are for them? Something I constantly said in the classroom and I constantly say in my house to my own children is, I am on your team. We are on the same team. Because I think it's so easy to see everyone as a threat or like against us and get defensive as opposed to being like, no, I'm on your team. And I think when our students do things that don't make sense, just like when my children do things that don't make sense and they harm each other or are rude or disrespectful or whatever, instead of saying like, why would you do that? Trying to say, help me understand your thought process here. so that it feels like, again, we are on the same team. So this all goes back to relationship builders and doing that, like I said, in a low lift way. I think one of the ways that you can do that is calling on every student in your class 2 times a day. And I know that may not seem like very much, but if you actually start tracking it, you might realize, like I did, that, oh, I'm like not actually doing that. I'm talking to the same like 10% of the class all the time, which tend to be the most engaged students and the least engaged and the most distractible and distracting students. And then all those kids in the middle kind of get left behind and they don't get seen. And so then they're not going to engage if they don't feel like you care about them. So calling on them 2 times a day. One of the ways I made sure to do this was with popsicle sticks. I write every student's name on a popsicle stick at the beginning of the year, but you can do it whenever you listen to this episode. You can keep them in a beaker or in a Ziploc bag. And then I just run through those 2 times in a class period. And I just make sure I'm running through them. I paired this low lift relationship builder and engaging them with little wins tip together because, again, they need to have confidence that when they speak in class, it's okay if they're wrong. It's not going to be embarrassing. And there's not going to be this pressure for them to engage and talk with you. And we're going to talk more next week, actually, in episode 225 about like what to do if your students like simply will not discuss and chat with you. But I think calling on them 2 times a day is huge. If I call on someone about a question or like I want to hear their answer to something and they like don't want to answer, 2 ways I'll approach that. One is I will say, okay, well, what questions do you have? Like, what are you struggling with understanding? Where did you get stuck? That kind of thing. And try to go from there. The second thing I'll do is sometimes I will just give them a freebie. I'll say like, okay, no worries. I'm putting you back in the bag though. Like next time I call your name, you have to engage. So I think giving them some grace there can help it, again, feel low lift because it doesn't feel like this pressure and they know they kind of get a freebie. Then when we get to the end of class, if I have like 7 to 10 or whatever popsicle sticks left in the bag because I haven't gone through it twice, I will do what my own chemistry teacher I mentioned, Zach Madsen, did. And I'll do news of interest, or you can say, tell me something good. It'll be like the last 5 minutes of class. You know, students are wrapping up. Maybe some of them are working independently on something. Some are packing up their bags. You can just say, okay, we're going to tell me something good. And you just draw names and it can be quick. And they can share something personal. They can share something about, you know, the world, something they read, something they're listening to. Like it could be something they're having for lunch or they're excited to eat. Like it can be the most basic thing. But I think that is a way that we build a relationship. We show we care. We create space for them to speak and in a way that, again, is like a little win, very low lift. Your energy input here is making the popsicle sticks and then just trying to go through them twice. I really think if you make a choice to be really intentional about this the remainder of the school year, you can see a really big difference in terms of those relationships and those connections you can make with students in those small ways. And then you remember some of the things you say and you follow up with them. Like that is how we build relationships. Okay, my second practical tip is especially for those of you who have block class periods. And so that's where it feels like it's super hard to keep their attention and engagement for 80 or 90 minutes. I want you to have a clear agenda written on your whiteboard and to constantly change up what you're doing and have a fast-paced classroom. Okay, so this one's kind of all to do with like your lesson plan for the day. But I really feel like students' respect can come from seeing your competence and your care. Them seeing your competence and your role, like that you are a good teacher and you're prepared to do your job. And then also your care for them as individual humans. So we kind of talked about the care for individual humans in tip number 1 with like building the relationships, engaging with them, asking them questions, that kind of thing. Giving them grace when they don't want to answer, but still giving them outs too of like, okay, you don't have to have an answer, but what would be a question you could have to like further this discussion. But now let's talk about them seeing your competence. I know it seems so small, but I really feel like when I would walk into a classroom myself as a student and see that there's a plan on the board, it just tells me that the teacher knows what's going on and we're going to be doing stuff in this class period as opposed to just kind of seeing how it all goes. So having an agenda shows like you're in control, you're competent, and it makes you trustworthy because we're going to work through these things. I also feel like if they know what to expect, like these are the things we're going through today, then they're less likely to be counting down the clock, dragging their feet because they see this is what we're going to be doing. So I will literally put like just bullet points, like prime time, go over this practice page, whatever from yesterday, notes on this page in your packet of like your with the Cornell note outline. Then we're going to do this activity. Then we're going to circle back to the notes and then we're going to do this lab. Like I'm switching it up at least every 15 minutes. You can see that too if you go to my YouTube channel. youtube.com/ and then you got to do the @ It's Not Rocket Science Classroom. But I have all of my lecture videos. Every single one is up there. And one of the things I do in my slides is I put like a title slide that will say when we're going to insert an activity. So it's something you can look at just to say like, okay, how much is she lecturing? And then stopping, and we're going to break and do an activity in real life. But in the video, we kind of keep going. But you can see when those breaks will be. I'm always trying to break it apart. I have an anatomy of in a class period cheat sheet that kind of shows how I would divvy up a 50-minute class versus a 90-minute class because I've taught in both settings. I'm going to link that in the show notes. Again, it's like a total freebie, but I think it'll help you with pacing your class, especially you block teachers. There needs to be a lot of transitions. And while transitions can seem to use time up, I do find that it's worth it to keep the class moving and hopping around, and we're not just going to do one thing for 90 straight minutes. Now, where does your energy input come from here? What's required of you to do this? It's just writing your agenda on the board. I do it at the end of the day before the next day. So I like it to be the last thing I do before I leave my classroom. It was always to write the agenda for every class. If you don't have time then, doing it first thing when you come in the next morning. But it's great because then, if you keep up with a class website or Google Classroom or whatever your like online digital learning LMS system is, your Blackboard, whatever, you can then say like, this is what we did today. This is what we covered. And if you don't get through it all, it's fine. It's fine. We're obviously human. It's not going to go perfectly. But at least I just think it makes a difference for your students to walk in and know like, okay, we have stuff to do today. It just does something in their brain to kind of turn up their attention a little bit more. Practical tip number 3. If Googling is a problem, because that is what one of the teachers submitted in my survey, like how to get them to stop Googling and actually engage, actually think. If Googling is a problem, y'all, we have to eliminate the option. Okay, I was talking with some mom friends about this the other day. We were talking about screen time and like our children being entitled to like having a certain amount of screen time or whatever. And it was harsh, but I had to just draw a line in the sand with my kids after the holidays. I did this like mid-January. We just got out of control with our screen time when we were home and watching Christmas movies and all this stuff. And it was cold. We actually got snow here. So like the screen time had got out of control. I had to eliminate the option. I had to just say, okay, we're not going to have screens for an entire week. And then from there, we started a new schedule after our little detox where I have a schedule of like my children and it rotates each day who gets to pick a show. And on Sundays, no one gets a turn because I have 3 kids. So they each get 2 days a week that they pick one show and that is it. And of course, there was drama when I first implemented this, but then they adjusted and they adapted. Your students can do the same thing, but I do think sometimes it requires like a hard reset button. So if like the Google usage, the AI usage, the tech usage is getting out of control, we have to eliminate it as an option. Maybe it's like unreasonable for you in your school. You're not allowed to go completely tech free. Then maybe you're like, we're going to go tech free the rest of this quarter or for this next week or whatever, and just start a hard boundary there. I also think if they can't access Google, if they aren't able to access ChatGPT in your classroom, then that's going to force some engagement there that's going to be different than if they have these tools at their disposal. Now, I know many of you might think, well, that's not realistic because in the real world, they'll have access to these tools, which is totally fair. But I also think we have to see this like we see many things when we're dealing with adolescents. Their brains are not fully developed. They struggle with self-control. I mean, I'm an adult. I struggle with self-control. So sometimes it's removing temptation and it can kind of help strengthen some muscles that then those skills will carry them later to be able to think independently while they also have access to these tools. Now, if for some reason you're in a school or a teaching setting where like you are not allowed to remove tech or disallow it in your classroom or whatever, then this does require a slightly heavier lift because you're going to start having to ask harder questions so that Googling an answer doesn't answer the question that you're asking. Now, again, I don't want you to reinvent the wheel here curriculum-wise. I don't want you to have to do a ton of effort to like rework all of your assignments. But I think one simple way we can do this is keep your existing instructional resources that you're using, but add on to them and say, okay, if you're going to be Googling the answer, then with your answer, you must provide one of the following. You need to provide an explanation in your own words. And I think they need to be able to do this verbally. So yeah, they can write something down, but then they need to be able to express that, giving you eye contact and explain it without just reading something that they, again, copied an explanation from the internet for. They could add on a prediction. Okay, you Googled this answer now, so then what would we expect to predict in the future in a similar situation? They can add a connection. Okay, you read this, that's the answer. Now connect it to something we've been learning about in class, something else, something we learned in the last unit. Or maybe it's an application. Take what you just read and you read the explanation for. Now apply it to something that matters to you. So we're adding on an explanation, a prediction, a connection, an application. We're trying to stretch the question just to make it slightly more challenging. Reminder, like y'all know this, students Google because we have trained them. And I mean, we as in society in the world, not like we as in you and me specifically, but just all of us. And I've been trained too, that the goal is to get the answer, not to think critically. And so if the task only requires Google, Google's going to win. If the task requires or even just allows ChatGPT, ChatGPT is going to win. So we've got to train them to engage like in the learning process, not just getting a product out on paper. So your energy input for this is just add on or extend the question if you can't eliminate tech. Or the other option that could be really simple is maybe you're saying, hey, we're not going to use any tech in our classroom just for the rest of the year and just kind of see how it goes. And this is also why I don't assign homework because they're definitely going to use it outside of the classroom. Practical tip number 4 is student choice. I think one way we care about process over product, which I was just talking about, is giving them some autonomy over their choices in terms of how they show their understanding. We don't have to necessarily care how they're going to explain that they understand this topic or have made these connections or whatever. So we can give them some options in order to do that because we care more about the learning process they're walking through, the research they're doing, what they're creating, the connections they're making. And so all we have to do then on our end is make rubrics that are more open-ended. And ChatGPT can help with this. I do think it's not great at making rubrics. I think Magic School AI does this a little bit better. But I think one thing ChatGPT is good at is idea generation. So saying, hey, like I want to do this project, or I have this project I always do in my class. Can you give me some ideas of topics that I could have the students research or ideas of outputs that they could create in order to show what they know while we're still hitting all these objectives and doing this project with the integrity I originally designed it for? Okay, so we're using these tools to kind of help us. We're just making the grading more open-ended. And then we're going to do all of this processing in our classroom. I'm a really big fan of taking the time, even though I know it can be painful, to do projects and things like this in class, because then you're able to monitor their process and make sure they are actually using their brains and not just their fingertips on a keyboard. Okay, so I know that's a lot. Just to recap, practically, number 1, low lift relationship builders and ways to get them engaged with little wins. Even the win of saying, tell me something good that's going on. Practical tip number 2, clear agenda on your board and constantly changing up what you're doing in your class so that the class is moving at a fast pace and they're staying engaged and we're hopping around here. We're not just going to sit and do one thing. Practical tip number 3, if Googling is a problem, we're going to eliminate the option. Practical tip number 4 is student choice. Okay, I've got 2 more for you. Again, one of the themes was just making science relevant for students that just see it as totally irrelevant. And so my practical tip number 5 for you is you and I both know, like, science is forever relevant. Like, of all the subjects, I would argue it is the most relevant of anything they're doing. And so let's not waste a bunch of energy trying to convince them of this, but let's show them the skills that we are engaging when we're doing these different things we're doing in our science classes that are going to help them forever. Like I mentioned at the top, instead of writing like your students will be able to statements on your board or your standards, and you might have to do that because your admin make you, but put the skills that we're going to do today that are like the life skills that we're engaging so they can see how it will help them. So for example, day 1 of chemistry, I encourage every teacher to tell their students, chemistry can seem scary because it's abstract to them. But at the end of the day, chemistry is a problem-solving course at its core. It is a critical thinking course, period. It's like puzzles, if you will. My husband, who is not sciencey at all, found chemistry to be his favorite because his teacher showed him that like this is really just problem solving, okay? So show them the life skills that they are engaging. So maybe the content isn't relevant to them, but what you're doing in your class is relevant. And if you need help, again, that's a way that you can engage ChatGPT to say, hey, what are some skills that I can incorporate that will transfer to other things they're doing in their lives? Even with a cookie cutter lab, the most basic lab that's not even inquiry based in the slightest, there's a life skill there to be following directions and to doing things precisely and being able to read something and then execute it. I mean, I'm constantly having to follow recipes with people climbing up my legs and dogs trying to trip me and people ask me to spell things every 5 seconds because I've got a kindergartner and a second grader and they want to spell everything right, and having to not be distracted. So that's a life skill, being able to follow a step-by-step thing when you're in a distracted environment. Okay. I know that might sound trite, but it's true. These are the skills we're teaching them. And the last thing I'll say about this in terms of relevancy is even if the content isn't relevant to them, even if the skills, they can't see relevance to them, your relationship and how you make them feel in your classroom will forever be relevant to them. They will remember how you make them feel and how you engage them. So that goes all the way back to the beginning and relationships mattering the most. My challenge for you of your energy input, again, if you don't want to do anything with this, go back to the relationships because your relationship breeds relevancy because you will become relevant to them in their lives. But if you want a tiny bit more energy input that's still low lift, is instead of writing those objectives and standards on your whiteboard, what if you make a section that's why you should care or why this matters? And maybe sometimes it is a fun fact for their content. Maybe it's something that really does apply to their future in society, or maybe it's just a skill that you're doing that's going to apply in other areas of their lives. That's what I want you to think about for practical tip number 5. And then last but not least, practical tip number 6 for keeping students' attention without exhausting yourselves or killing yourself to do it is that enthusiasm is contagious. If you are excited, if you have energy, they will be excited, they will have energy. I'm not saying if you care, they will care, but I'm just saying if you walk in with a bad attitude and you're dreading what's about to happen, that is going to suck the life out of the classroom. So what would make you have fun teaching this? Regardless of how they respond, what would make this enjoyable for you? And do those things. If it's a funny video that you think that's funny to share, if it's trying out a new project or lab because you're excited to see what happens, if it's a topic that you personally find interesting, if it's a way that you can bring in a guest speaker because you want your students to hear this application in the real world, those are all fun things to break up the monotony of the day-to-day by doing something different. And again, you can just have fun with it. And hopefully they'll have fun with it in return. But maybe the goal here is just you start having more fun yourself, and we'll see if they follow suit. Now, specifically want to address before I let you go, the question of non-babyish advice for engaging honor students, because sometimes teachers think they're getting gimmicky. I don't think that's the case. I think there's room for gimmicks and fun in all levels. But I think engaging honor students mainly looks like increased autonomy and independence, creating intellectual discussions and debate, letting them kind of argue things. And then again, extending what you're doing by having them explain, predict, connect, apply, doing those upper level Bloom's taxonomy skills. That's how we're going to engage them without it seeming babyish. But you can still do kitschy things in your classroom. You can still be silly. You can still put up, crime scene tape and I have my safety Barbie that's the life-size Barbie that I used. And I used it in AP too. They may roll their eyes and say I'm chuggy or whatever, but they do kind of like it. So I do think there are things we can do that are still fun, and we don't have to just assume it's babyish because they've told you that, okay? So your energy input here for tip number 6 is, what do you care about personally? What sounds fun to you? Whatever you care about, let's lean into that because that'll be most natural to you. And what sounds fun to you, at least you'll have fun even if no one else is, okay? So this was so long and I'm so sorry. Just had a lot to say, and I really genuinely hope it's helpful. So my take-home challenge for you to pick one thing would honestly all be the popsicle sticks. Making those if you don't have them yet and trying to call on all of your students twice in one day. That is such a basic thing you can start doing to engage and build a relationship with your students. And I think everything can go from there in terms of you're engaging them personally, then they may engage more in your classroom. Lastly, I want to remind you, I would love to have you on my podcast. I would love, love, love it. I'm accepting applications all spring, and then I'll be reviewing these end of April, early May, and then scheduling interviews for the summer. So I would love to have you apply. You can do so at bit.ly/SSSguest. And you can find that link and any others I mentioned in the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 224.
All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.